Season's greetings and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now today is a special episode to celebrate the silly season. So it's that time of the year when traffic is manic, parking is terrible, and of course your credit card takes an absolute hammering. So I thought, what better way to cheer some folk up with, I guess, a little bit of an unusual video in today's episode, and do expect it to be very left field. So I thought, what better way to get into the festive spirit, apart from obviously wearing my Santa t-shirt, but to do something a little bit different on the layout and bring a little bit of festive cheer to the Station Road channel. So, you're probably thinking, I think Julian has finally lost the plot. Now, what on earth has spurred me on to create these wee creatures here? And it's quite an interesting story. So, a wee while back, I stumbled across a new channel or new video that just happened to come up in my recommended viewing. And it's a channel called Shedmouth Junction, and it is actually operated or presented by two people, a father and a daughter, so Martin and Evie. Now, the video I watched was a video about creating a challenge or presenting a challenge to fellow YouTubers or just any railway modelers to do something weird and wacky with one of their old wagons. So I watched this video and you wouldn't believe how entertaining and how much it put a smile on my face. Now, we can all get a little bit too serious in this hobby when we start getting down to some really super nitty gritty details and all that type of thing. Not to say that that is not fun, but there's also another kind of fun, and that's just being downright silly. So I thought, what better way to celebrate the silly season with creating these two wagons. So I'll actually jump over to a video where I show you how I actually made these. Quite simple, but nonetheless it's a very different approach to my usual modelling projects. Right, so now you'd like to know how I made one of these little Rudolf wagons, and it's pretty simple actually. So it's basically an old Lima tank wagon. Now I have a collection of these that originally I was going to use to set up track cleaning wagons, and it sort of never eventuated, so they're quite good. You can remove the tank off it quite easily. They do have the big old D couplings and plastic wheels, so there's nothing to write home about them, but we can certainly make some interesting improvements. We have some fabric here. Now this is kind of, I guess, what you call like a polar fleece type of fabric. I just bought some of this from a local haberdashery store from Spotlight here in New Zealand. So we've got some of that. It's a little bit stretchy, which is good because we can stretch it around Rudolph's bottom. And then I picked up this Christmas decoration pack. Now this is also from Spotlight, which, as I mentioned, haberdashery craft type store, and these are Christmas decorations, I guess, that you hang on your tree, and they come kind of like in a kit, I guess. You assemble it, make them up yourself, so that we've got some fluffy pom-poms of different sizes and some cutout shapes for felt. So I think this only cost me a few dollars, so it's pretty cheap. So we've got our items here that we're actually going to use. So we've got our brown pom-pom for the head, we've got some little wee red ones for the nose, and then we've got this cut out felt shape, which of course for the antlers, and then we've got some little eyes to put on. Now, a pair of scissors. I've got a couple of different scissors here. We've got some fine scissors, and we also need some super glue. So I'm just using the 3M Super 77 super glue, and then we have ourselves a hot glue gun. So I guess I should put in here the old disclaimer here. Kids, if you're watching this, then particularly the hot glue gun and also the spray glue, you might need to get your parents to help you out with that. The hot glue gun, a little bit dangerous, and of course unless you have one of those low temperature glue guns. And then of course spray glue, this really needs to be outside. You certainly don't want to be using this at your parents' dining table. So the first thing I need to do is obviously remove the tank itself. Now with this example that I've made here, I actually just simply chopped the end off the tank. Now of course, if you don't actually really want to completely destroy your wagon, you could remove the tank, and maybe even probably a toilet roll would work. If you cut a slot in it that was the same size as this base, you could create a cylindrical shape here using a toilet roll, in which case you end up saving your tank, and then when you've had enough of Rudolf, you can return the wagon back to a tank wagon. But I'm not going to be using these on my layout in any way, so I'm just going to saw the end off this tank. So we'll do that now, and we'll come back in a few minutes. Right, so job done. We've chopped the end off this tank, and now we can fit it onto here just to check that it's still okay, and that still slots in there. And of course that is going to give us room in here to pop our head. So the next step here is using the spray glue. I'm going to coat this with the spray glue, and then of course we're going to stretch this fabric over the tank and essentially wrap it around the main body of the tank. So I'm going to take this outside and spray glue this outside, because when you get spray glue everywhere, just everything becomes all sticky. So we'll take this outside and give this a blasting with the spray glue. Right, so I've covered this with the spray glue, and of course I've just stuck it on the end of a block of wood so that I could spray it, because clearly you can see I'm not wearing gloves, which is probably pretty silly of me, but never mind. So we're just going to wrap this over here. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm just wrapping it around the main body part. Make sure that this is all stuck down, and then depending on how good your fabric is, we can kind of pull and stretch this over the rear end, and then Rudolf ends up with a nice smooth round bottom. So there we go, we've got that sorted out. So I might just give this a few minutes for it to dry, and then we're going to trim off all the excess. Now I'm using these scissors here because they're much easier to get in here. They're a lot sharper and much easier obviously to trim off the excess. I think we'll just start with the big scissors and cut off some of the excess. So I've got to say, this is a somewhat interesting exercise, and I guess it sort of brings up a number of, I guess, what would you call them, philosophies that maybe I have about model railways. And of course most of us, and whether you're on YouTube or not, take the modelling sector quite seriously. I mean, there's a sort of, I guess in some ways, a goal to create either something quite prototypical as you would see it in the real world, or you've dreamed something up in your head and you want to make that a reality. So I kind of see this sort of modelling industry, it's a little bit, I mean, to me it's a little bit like fine art. You've got your super realist artists out there who literally paint exactly what they see, and down to the last shade and the last shadow and colour tone. And of course when you look at it you could almost swear it was a photo, and in some respects I sort of feel like, well, why don't you just take a photo? It would be a lot easier. But I guess the extraordinary side to that, particularly super realism in terms of art, is the sheer technical ability. I find it extraordinary. I had quite a fascination with super realist artists and their works when I was younger, and it just blows me away just how you can look at it and assume that it's a photo and then discover that it's actually a painting. So there's that aspect there, and then you could completely go to the other end of the scale and, you know, even for example, take a look at Banksy. He's an artist, but in a completely different realm, and very thought-provoking, but in a different way. And I see sort of model railways very much in the same way. It's extremely subjective. It can be objective, but in general it's a subjective form of art. And if you're building a model railway, you're many things. You're an artist, you're a carpenter, you're an electrician, you're a sculptor, you're a town planner, you're so many things. So it's a fascinating industry to be in, and you might consider that sort of more of an adult aspect, that it's really beyond a young mind's ideas and thoughts. But I started out as a young child, of course, with my first train set when I was in my early teens, maybe, or a bit earlier than that, maybe 10 or 11 years old, and I built my first layout very much based on that. That's my perception of the real world, and of course not very accurate, but it didn't matter. That's just the way it was. So it's an interesting hobby to get into, and I think with all the old and serious people like myself, particularly on YouTube, that I certainly wouldn't want to be one of those people that maybe are putting off the younger generation from having a go at this particular hobby, because with things like PlayStations and Xboxes and all of that kind of stuff these days, I think the model railway industry or the hobby is, I wouldn't say it's dying, but it's certainly possibly missing that younger generation at this point. So let's just do something silly like this and maybe inspire some young kids to consider getting off their PlayStations and Xboxes and doing something kind of quirky and interesting like this. Anyway, that's my wee babble. So we've now trimmed this. We've got our kind of fluffy body all set up, and of course if we slot this back on here, we've now got the body in place, and of course the next step is we're going to pop a head on here. So this is where the hot glue gun comes in, and as I mentioned before, kids, if you're going to try this at home, you might need some assistance from your folks to help with the hot glue gun. So what I'm actually going to do is, because I'm not reusing these wagons, I'm actually just going to hot glue this tank back onto this body. It will just give it a bit of rigidity here, and then that allows me to pack that into there and super glue that in place. So we'll get onto that now and fire up the hot glue gun. Right, so we've got our glue gun up to temperature, so I'm just going to drizzle a tiny little bit of glue along the inside edge of this here. That's just going to help to anchor this in place on the chassis. Doesn't need to be perfect, but that's anchored in quite nicely there. And then we're just going to drizzle a little bit of glue up on this top edge, so not the whole way around, and we're going to fix our antlers up here. So now I've got the antlers fixed into there, and then over the top of that we're going to drizzle some glue around the whole end and along this edge here, but around there and around that other edge, and fix our head in. And of course, the whole time you're using this hot glue gun, you're not going to get burning hot glue on your fingers. So that's pretty much in place there. Now we're going to pop on a nose, and I'm just using my tweezers for this because these bits are a little bit small, and the last thing I want to do is burn my fingers. So blob of hot glue on there. So we've got our nose, and once again the same for the eyes, pair of tweezers, something that is going to stop you from burning your fingers, and just a tiny little wee blob of hot glue there, and we'll pop an eye on. It's a bit tricky using the hot glue with this fluffy pom-pom, but what we can do is, if there's any glue that sort of ended up squeezing out from the sides, we can of course trim that off. Right, there we go. We now have a face, and last but not least, a little wee white tail on the back. And there we have it. Our Rudolf is complete, and It's hilarious. So we can now hook these together, and we encountered a little bit of a problem here. It would appear that one Rudolf is sniffing the other Rudolph's bottom. Well, I guess them's the brakes. So there we have it. Now you know how to make yourself a wee Rudolf wagon, and I actually found it quite fun working on this. It takes you away from the seriousness of railway modelling and just gives your mind a break from that side of things and just doing something really quite silly and fun. So I'll pop a link up in the top corner for the Shedmouth Junction channel, and in particular the video that they put out for their wagon challenge. So before I go, I thought I'd just like to take the opportunity, of course, to thank my subscribers and viewers and everyone who leaves their comments on my videos. Once again, I'm apologizing for not responding to all the comments that have come in. Hopefully over this Christmas New Year period I'll be able to actually sit down and actually start doing some of those replies. So I'm hoping to get out one last video for 2023 just before New Year's, and then it'll be into the new year, and of course some continuation of projects and also new projects coming up during 2024. So I'll sign off for now, and of course a very Merry Christmas to everyone. Do take care, look after yourselves. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.
Hello, my name is Rudolf.